All right, you guys. Well, that was awesome. And by the way, we walked the walk and talked the talk, that whole thing. Notice that a lot of what you heard in that quiz was thinking about step one, the intervention living in the real world, right? And it's so surprising, like how many interventions are written down, y'all, that don't have a plan for engagement. They don't have a plan for adherence. They don't even have a plan for, oh my gosh, the family was stuck in traffic. They didn't make it to their 5th session, which is when I was supposed to learn whether they were a responder or not. But an intervention must have a plan for all those things because an intervention lives in the real world. How did we get ourselves in those pickles? Because we didn't. It was all about me, the researcher, when I was developing the intervention. I wasn't thinking about it living in the real world, y'all. That's what's happening, okay? All right. So I hope that's provocative. I hope you guys new ideas are flowing through. Okay, the second thing we asked you to do during your pre-institute training was we asked you to go see this video called Introduction to Smart Designs. And that sending you to go do that was the result of, over the years, Billy and I are, because we're still doing research. We're not just teaching. We keep amassing new methods, and we needed to fit it into 3 days. So we're like, okay, we got to get you to go do some videos so that we can put the new methods into Katie, right? And that's actually what IES wants us to do. They want us to develop new methods and keep building out Katie. So all of you saw the SMART video. Let's get right into it. So whereas Billy's Module 1 was all about the adaptive intervention and you were in the shoes of a practitioner, now you're in the shoes of a researcher doing research. And I'm going to be asking you some questions about SMARTs. Everybody ready? Okay. And I don't know if I'm using a Kahoot or not. I might not be. Am I using a Kahoot? Where's Ian? I am later. Okay, all right, here we go. So an example adaptive intervention. And for some reason, this thing stopped working, but here we go. Let's try it. An example of an okay, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to talk about an example of an adaptive intervention. We're going to define a SMART. We're going to show you an example SMART, and then I think I'm doing the Kahoot. I think that's how it's rolling. All right, here we go. So here's an example. Ooh, where's Connie? Oh, she's okay. So this is an example inspired by Connie, who you'll get to ask her 20 questions later today. And in this example adaptive intervention, this is not yet a study. This is still an example adaptive intervention. These are children with ASD, autism, who are minimally verbal. Okay? And actually, Connie was one of the first, if not the first person to run a randomized trial, definitely the first to run an optimization randomized trial among minimally verbal kiddos. And in this example, we offer the kiddos, when they walk through the door, something called discrete trials training. For those of you that know about ABA principles, that's basically what it is. Okay, and all of you probably know all about that. And it tries to get the child reward-based to get them to speak and use words. And it's all about rewarding to use words. And there's a whole strategy on how you do that, and that's DTT. Okay? And at week 6, we know whether the child is a slower responder or a full-blown fast responder. Notice how the language is changing when we get to autism. That's totally okay. You guys don't have to use response, non-response. And if the child is a slower responder, we added in Jasper. Jasper is an intervention. The way Connie describes it to me, it's called joint attention, social engagement. Help me out here. What's the P? Social engagement, play, and emotional regulation. That's it. Joint attention. So I learned this from Connie 12 or 15 years ago, that if I point at my shoe, right, my brown shoe, and we all engage on the brown shoe, it turns out that that's one of the things that if we work on with a child who has autism will lead to spoken communication. That's sort of where the evidence is right now. So Jasper tries to do that as opposed to DTT, which focuses on rewarding you for speaking, right? Okay? I know I'm simplifying, but that's okay. I get to do that because I'm a statistician. All right? When you talk to Connie, it's more subtle and, okay? And then the intervention ends at week 16. Everybody with me? So this is an example of that. So can we do more for these children? Do some need more and do others require less? That was the very broad question Connie and I had as researchers when we had our first conversation. All right, so we had this in mind. We had this in mind in the real world. That was step one. But then we had other things in mind in step one, which is could we do more or do other kids need less? All right. Well, what do we mean by other kids need less? Well, maybe we just do Jasper for 16 weeks. Or maybe we just do DTT for 16 weeks. That's a version of needing less in the sense that, like, it's less complex. Okay? And some of the questions Connie and I started bouncing around are what we call typical optimization questions. So how long should we offer the first treatment? Remember, we had already envisioned that adaptive intervention I showed you in the real world. We already did step one. And now Connie and I were moving to step two, questions. By the way, that's the only thing we get paid for, y'all, as researchers, is curiosity and asking questions. You're not getting paid to show an intervention works. You're getting paid to ask the cool questions. Everybody got that? So some of the cool questions are typical optimization questions are like, how long should we offer the first treatment? What tactics should we use for non-responders to the first stage treatment? What tactics should we use for responders to the intervention? How do we re-engage participants who are non-adherent or drop out? What is the most effective delivery location for an intervention? So what I want you to realize, y'all, is that whereas in module 1, when Billy was speaking, we were actually incorporating all these things into all the different example adaptive interventions you saw. But now, I'm a researcher, right? In this module too, I'm a researcher. I'm asking all those questions. How do I incorporate all these things into the intervention? Those are optimization questions, and they're so much more fun. Evaluation questions don't have any of this. Evaluation questions are, does it work? Okay? We get to have more fun. That's a good t-shirt. Optimizers get to have more fun. All right? All right. All right, here's some more. What is the most effective delivery location? What is the most effective delivery mode? By delivery mode, I mean, like, do you do it via, like, text message? Do you do it via, like, email? You know, for example, for those of you working in tech-based areas. Delivery mode could also be, like, do I deliver it in the clinic? Or do I go to the school and deliver it there, right? This is the kind of stuff we all get to ask as optimizers. What is the best way to define non-response? Ain't that cool? There it is. Where's Nathan? There it is. If you guys, any of you who are optimizers, having more fun, doubling down on measurement, you might get an IES grant on what is the best way to define non-response. Of course, you have to fill in the blank for purposes of, intervening in certain ways, right? You could get a measurement grant that's all about adaptive interventions. You can. I think you can. Is it more effective and cost-effective to use the more burdensome intervention? Oh, get ready for this. This is beautiful. Ready? Is it more effective and cost-effective to use the more burdensome intervention first and then step down for individuals doing well versus should we stick with a stepped-up intervention model? Now, there's a lot going on there, but it's purposefully rich. This is an optimization question. It's essentially saying, should I start with low-intensity things first and then ramp up when I discover kids are not responding? All of you know about this, right? Tiers 1, 2, and 3 in schools, right? Right? But y'all, I'm here to tell you that may not be the only way to do things. It may be we come right out of the gates with, bam, a really strong, burdensome, powerful intervention, and then decide, oh my gosh, the kiddo is responding, let's step down. Right? Doesn't have to be stepped up. It could be stepped down. Well, these are the kinds of questions optimizers ask. You guys see that? Unfortunately, we live in a world that is like so in love with stepped up interventions, and I like them too. But I wanted to make you aware that that doesn't have to be the only world we live in. Optimizers, you get to ask whatever crazy questions you want. And I have a sneaky feeling, and no one's ever done this, nobody, because I've been trying to get some early career people to do it, that we actually don't know whether stepping up or stepping down, which one is more cost effective. It could be that spending all your money up front and shoring up all the kiddos, and then deciding who to step down might actually save us some money and be more effective. We just don't even know. You guys see that? So these are all questions that you do in the middle of the night at 3 a.m. These are the things you do when you get to the office. This is what optimizers do. In a grant proposal, these questions are expressed as primary and secondary aims. What do I mean by that? Well, you might end up narrowing it down to a list of 4 or 5 optimization questions, but we do still live in a world where every research study, every trial, hangs their hat on a primary question. So this is what I'm priming you for here. Okay? Even if I have 10 optimization questions, I have to decide which one's the most important one to me and be able to make that case. So let's talk about smarts. All right. An experimental design is not an intervention design. What's a smart? It is a experimental design. Does your school teacher do a smart? No. Do the optimizers and researchers do smarts? Yes. Okay. It's a type of multi-stage randomized trial. Turns out there's a few different kinds of multi-stage randomized trials that statisticians have been cooking up over many years. But it's very special because it's one in which at each stage of the SMART corresponds to a critical question, a critical decision point at which you have a question. Okay? A randomization takes place at each of these decision points. That does not mean I have an adaptive intervention. Say I have an adaptive intervention with 10 decision points. That does not mean you have to put a randomization at all 10 of those decision points. But it means that you're putting a randomization where you have a question. This is what I mean by disentangling the adaptive intervention you envision from your question. And some or all participants are randomized more than once. I have to say some, because maybe you discovered this already. Some people don't get re-randomized in a SMART, right? Let's go see an example. So what's the goal of a SMART? The goal of a SMART is to inform the construction of a high-quality adaptive intervention. This is basically the sentence that says you're an optimizer without using fancy jargon. Right? Because trust me when I tell you that this is not the goal of an evaluator. The goal of an evaluator is to decide whether the thing works. All right? So not all research about adaptive interventions requires a SMART. This is such an important concept, y'all. Because Billy and I are not asking all of you to walk out the door and do a SMART. We're going to say that about 12 more times. Because Billy and I have integrity, and the last thing we need is for people to think of D3C as the place where, oh yeah, you only go to them if you want to do a SMART. No, we are the place for adaptive interventions, for sure. But I don't want on my tombstone for it to say the smart guy, No. Okay? And so Billy and I cooked up this thing which has since evolved, but this is the simple version. Do I want to develop an adaptive intervention? If your answer is no, you're not going to be doing a SMART right out of the gates. That means you're not an optimizer. So if you're not an optimizer, you are not reaching for a SMART. Everybody hear that? You're just not. It's gone. Water under the bridge. Then, if you are an optimizer, are there open scientific questions preventing you, the scientist or the field, from constructing a really good adaptive intervention? If the answer is no, you don't need a SMART. If the answer is yes, you then have to ask yourself one more question. These questions preventing me from constructing a good AI, do I have them at multiple decision points? Because even if I have an adaptive intervention, but only at week 5 is the only place you have a question, and you have one randomization at week 5, that's not a SMART. It was an optimization question, but it wasn't a SMART. Billy, you have a question for me?
Yes. So I agree with you. We're not going to convince anybody to do a SMART.
Yes.
But are we going to convince them to develop an adaptive intervention?
Ooh, that's a loaded question. And I've secretly, I've never written this down in a manuscript or whatever, and I'm going to use the word I, Billy, so I don't involve you in my shenanigans, okay? Just in case you disagree with me. I have a sneaky feeling that most interventions in the real world are adaptive. Just a sneaky little feeling. I haven't written a paper on that. I haven't made that case, but I will with you all. So am I going to convince you guys to go do an adaptive intervention? I want you to think about it. It doesn't mean your research will yield one, but I want you to think about it. I want you to at least consider it. And I think in education, most education practitioners at all levels, from the superintendent to are using adaptive interventions in one way or the other. I mean, think RTI, the response to treatment intervention. Think MTSS. I mean, you name it, and y'all have been doing adaptive interventions for a long time, but maybe not using the jargon, and maybe not in the way Billy defined it earlier, which is well operationalized. Because what Billy and I want you to do is we want you to go right into that intervention and really have it protocolized and have it working like a well-oiled machine. That's what optimizers do. Billy, did that answer your question?
Yeah, totally. Well operationalized and evidence-based.
Evidence-based.
And going back to your comment from before, the evidence does not necessarily have to be scientific. It can also be practical evidence.
Of course.
Right?
Of course. If you already know that families in this target population are never going to do BMOD, like somehow you did a pilot study and learned that from feedback surveys, you're not going to be developing an adaptive intervention that has, behavior modification. Okay. So this module is supposed to be about smarts. So here's the smart that Connie and I cooked up. And what we did is we randomized, because one of our questions was, what do I start with kiddos who are minimally verbal with autism? And this is a major question in the field because DTT is effectively, for all intents and purposes, close to what's considered as usual care in autism. Connie taught me that. Even if it's not being waived that way, most kids, like in your with autism, will get DTT as to start. But we weren't sure. We weren't sure whether maybe there's a benefit to not starting with DTT, right? And so that was one of our questions. You guys feel me? So we wanted to know whether to start with Jasper versus DTT. But then we had other questions. Among the slower responders at week 6, by the way, week 6, we know whether you're a slow responder based on the therapist doing the Jasper and the therapist doing DTT. They're monitoring the kiddo. And there's a well-protocolized way in which it's called the CGI, Clinical Global Impression Scale. Connie developed it prior to this study, and she'll tell you more about it when she gets her talk. So we know whether the kid's a responder or slow responder. And among the slower responders, we really wanted to know, do we stay the course? C is stay the course, and G is stay the course? Or do we come out with the big ones, augmented Jasper DTT? The reason we wanted to know that is because Connie and I knew going into this that doing Jasper plus DTT is a much more complicated intervention than doing DTT alone or Jasper alone. And so you'll need a much more skilled therapist. It'll be more expensive. So we made this decision that, no, we don't envision a world where people are going to come out of the gates doing Jasper and DTT. Y'all see that? In step 1, we did not envision a world where you're going to be doing both out of the gates. But we did envision a world where the combination could be being used for slow responders, but we didn't know. We didn't know if doubling down and staying the course versus augmenting, right? You guys with me? It's still the same number of sessions. The way we cooked it, it's still the same number of sessions. So if I'm doing both of these things and it doesn't work, and I should have been doing Jasper, well, I want to know that. Even more importantly, it might be that some slow responders should have stayed the course and other ones should have got doubled down. That's another scientific question that we were interested in, right? Because it might be that some kids need to start here and others need to start here, and some slow responders need to stay the course and some slow responders should double down. Everybody with me? But we also had a question about the responding kiddos. It turns out that there was an intervention, parent training, parent coaching. It goes by many names. Here it's called parent training. I think in the manuscript we're writing, we changed it to parent coaching. But basically, during these two interventions, when you read the paper, what you're going to discover is the parents were watching through a window. The question is, if I get the kiddo to do this short-term response, do I then fold the parent into treatment? Not just watch through the window, but bring them into treatment. Y'all see that? That was an interesting question we had. Very exciting one. So this one tells me about the role of parent training. That is the role of whether the parent should be intervening on the kiddo. Everybody with me? So these are many of the optimization questions we had. The 3 most common primary aims in a SMART. Okay, this is new for this year. Ian, where's Ian? Ian wanted us to, Danny, we got to get our ducks in a row. We're going to start using AIM types. So we now have AIM type 1, 2, 3, and there's actually a fourth one you're going to hear about. And you're going to be hearing us talk about this throughout. So AIM type 1 is compare the main effect of initial intervention options. All right. AIM type 2 is compare the main effect of second stage options, and AIM type 3 is compare embedded adaptive emergence. Let me show you quickly what we meant by these three things. So, what is the best first stage treatment in terms of spoken communication at week 24? What's missing from this sentence is what is the best first stage treatment in terms of spoken communication at week 24 in the context of a world in which I'm going to adapt at the second stage. But this is a fine question to ask. And this question can be answered by comparing A, B, C, D to E, F, G, H. Because that's the comparison between starting with DT versus starting at Jasper. A fine question. And the question Connie selected as her primary aim in this study. Everybody with me? That was her primary aim. She was going to hang her hat on that one, meaning I think the field, when I say hang her hat, meaning I think the field needs the answer to this very important question. Got it? But we had other questions because we're optimizers. We have a bunch. So primary aim 1 hypothesis was, we thought starting with an AI with Jasper will improve more than starting with DTT. And I won't tell you what the answer is. Connie will be sharing results from the study during her talk. So I will withhold. Oh, shut my mouth. So AIM type 2s are different. AIM type 2s is comparing the main effect of second stage intervention options. So we actually had two of them in this study because we had two versions of that question. We had, among the kiddos that are responders, early responders, do I need parent training? And then we had the other question, among the kiddos who are slower responders, do we need to augment or stay the course? Also very fine question. So for example, primary aim hypothesis 2, among the slower responders, we thought blending will improve more than staying the course. So we would compare H and D, which is the tactic of blending, versus C and G, which is the tactic of staying the course. Everybody see that? That was a second question. And then I don't think I'm showing you the other one. The other one is like, what do I do with responders, okay? So A and E versus B and F, okay? Everybody good so far? All right, AIM type 3. This one is delicious. And by the way, this one over the years has become the one that most of you, early in the days of smarts, a lot of people made this one their primary aim, as did Connie. She's one of the leaders, right? She's the first person to ever do a smart in autism. But over time, we've been watching that the scientists have gravitated toward AIM type 3. What is AIM type 3? AIM type 3 is a comparison of embedded adaptive interventions. So when you stare at a smart, one of the coolest things about a smart is that embedded in there are many adaptive interventions. So take a look at this red one. And notice I'm trying to hide the R's because I'm talking about, I want to show you one of the embedded adaptive interventions. And one of them is start with DTT. If you don't respond, blend. If you respond, blend. Oh, I got a question for you guys. Is that adaptive? What do y'all think? Is that red intervention adaptive? Ready? Start with DTT. If you are a slow responder, blend. If you are responding, if you're responding, add parent training. Yeah, is that adaptive? It is adaptive, right? Because I brought in Jasper if you were slow responding. I brought in parent training if you were responding. All right, let's go to the other one. The other adaptive intervention. Start on Jasper. If you're responding, parent training, add parent training. If you're slow responding, add DTT. Do you guys see the subtleties, how this is not the primary aim question of what do we start with? This one's different. This one is saying, I want to compare a world in which the red adaptive intervention is the only one being used versus another world in which the blue adaptive intervention is. And this was this was actually a third question in Connie's trial. Now, you all are going to choose any one of these three as your primary aim. And that's what I was trying to say earlier. These are three aim types that are commonly selected as primary aims. Everybody with me? Connie and I selected this one as our primary aim, and these were secondary. But you, and when you're designing your star, you might decide to choose this one as primary and the other ones as secondary. Is everyone with me? I don't dictate that. That's you based on your science. Got it? Are we all on the same page? Yeah.
So if your main primary question is the comparison of the second stage intervention, how do you...
This one here? To determine whether adding parent training among responders is useful, or the other one, to determine whether blending among non-responders is useful.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think through, like, how do you get that to be your primary aim to justify getting to that point within the intervention?
Yeah,
Say, like, that's, like,
you justify it just like this. I mean, and you're going to see different ways to language it, but if that was your primary aim, it wouldn't say secondary aim, it would say primary aim.
Yeah.
And more than likely, you're likely to choose this one as your primary, because most of your reviewers may be like, well, the kid's responding. Don't make that one your primary, just because of our value sets. But if you might have said primary aim to determine among slower responders whether augmenting versus staying the course, you would have messaged it like that. You got it? All right. Does everybody understand the 3 aim types? There's going to be a 4th one we show you later. The reason we showed only 3 now is these are the 3 most common ones people select as a primary aim. Everybody with me? All right. So the most common secondary aim is aim type 4. Aim type 4 is this one. Construct a more deeply tailored adaptive intervention. Now, don't freak out if that is a mouthful of jargon that you're like, wait, more deeply than what? We are going to do a module. Module 7 is all about this aim type. So we're going to get to it. But let me kind of whet your appetite a little bit. You might believe that among early responders, those whose parents demonstrate greater buy-in will benefit more from parent training than from continuing. Notice what just happened, y'all. What we're saying is that among the kiddos that are responders, there's going to be heterogeneity in there. Even though I'm putting them all in a bucket, some of those kiddos that are responders had parents that had a lot of buy-in. And some of those kiddos that were responders had parents that, no buy-in. They just weren't into it. And remember, they get to have buy-in. And not only do they get to have buy-in, because we're thinking about the real world, right? They're the kiddo's parent. They also sat through the intervention. So they really have buy-in. If they were sitting through that window watching and they're like, no, this is not for my kid, right? That could be an important thing. And to Connie and I, that was an important thing for us to think about. So we said, I know how we're going to deal with this. We're going to make that a aim type 4 question, like a 4th aim, which is all about the role of the parents' buy-in to help me decide what treatment to give. Because it could be, y'all, and this is what Connie and I envisioned, that parents that have really high buy-in, that's when we should do parent training. But parents that don't have a lot of buy-in, we shouldn't. That could be the case. And that was our question. We wanted to sort of know, what are we looking for in a parent to decide whether to do parent training? You know what I mean? Because we want to tailor that question, that provision. Does everybody see what I'm saying? Now, you are going to come up with your own questions, but you guys see what's going on here? Everybody see what's going on? Yes? Yes? This is a very delicious question because this hypothesis allows us to test a candidate tailoring variable, namely buy-in, which might moderate the effect of whether or not I do parent training. Testing this hypothesis could lead to an even better tailoring variable. So like if this hypothesis pans out, then guess what, y'all? When we roll out to the real world, we're going to break this up into 2 kinds of responders. Responders with parent buy-in and responders without parent buy-in, and we might be selecting different treatments as a result. Does everybody see that? See why we're optimizers? So groovy. I love it, man. I love it. This is such a novel's trial. All right, so this was the actual secondary aim Connie and I cooked up. You ready? So now we're literally like showing you the verbiage we used in the grant. Secondary aim 3, so it's a lower ordered aim, but deliciously interesting. To construct a more richly individualized adaptive intervention by examining whether baseline repetitive behavior or baseline object interest moderate the effect of first aid. So we actually had questions about where do we start the kid? Haha, cool, right? So that all folds into aim type 4. So should we start the kids on DTT or Jasper depending on how they are when they walk through the door? Cool. And then we had these other ones. We had one for the early responders and one for the slow responders. So for the early responders, you already heard my spiel. Buy-in. We wanted to see, is buy-in important or should we not even bother with it? And for the slower responders, what does it say here, you guys? The extent of slow response. So it turns out, you guys, Connie and I are not like, slow responders doesn't mean everyone in that bucket is the same. There's going to be slow responders that were right on the edge of being a responder, and then there's going to be slow responders that are really struggling. Right? Right? Well, and we wanted to dig in there and say, okay, if you were a really poor slow responder, maybe those are the kids that need the blended treatment. Does everybody see? Is everyone starting to see how the logic model for smarts and how we go about asking questions? It's kind of beautiful. And here's an example of a more deeply tailored AI. I already showed this to you earlier. And then actually, I wanted to fold in a bunch of concepts into this slide. First of all, there's no randomization here. So like this could be one of the results of Connie's study. This could be it. It's not. We haven't gotten to aim 4 yet in our analysis. But it could be that we start with DTT, and it could be we have to check in to see what kind of responder we have. And if you're low parent buy-in, the therapist just says, hey, parent buy-in is an option. Parent training is an option. Do you want it? But if the kiddo has high parent buy-in, then we just say, we're doing it. We're doing it. We're rocking forward. You know what I mean? You see that? It's so cool. All right. How many minutes do I have left, Ian?
25.
That's great. Because I went fast thinking I had less time. So let me stop here before I do my Kahoot. Does anyone have any questions before we go do Kahoots? So I did it a little different from Billy. I had a few slides, a few warm-up slides, and it went a little longer. But before I go to Kahoots, any questions so far about anything I shared? Yeah?
I have a question that you probably maybe don't like about sample size.
Yeah.
Now that we have all of these different paths, where are we thinking is doing a effects that? Yeah, just speak to where do we think we're going?
So I love the way you started it. That you may not like. But, I'm a statistician. I got a PhD in statistics. I love sample size conversations, okay? So I actually love those questions. We are going to show you all about sample size. And we have a handout about sample size. If it's not printed, that's okay because we didn't print everything. It's going to be on our website where we have like a little sheet that shows you for different types of AIM types, 1, 2, and 3, what the formula is for sample size.
I'll hand it out in a moment.
Amazing, Ian. And then the other thing is, so we don't shy away from sample size. That's at the core of what we do. And it is true, and I'm not even going to beat around the bush. It is true that AIM type 1 requires the least amount of sample size. AIM type 2 requires the most of the 3, and AIM type 3 is somewhere in the middle. This is a fact. We don't beat around the bush. This is published. Billy and I say this to everyone. So we're not trying to put a veil over your heads. It is true that different questions will demand different sample sizes. That is fact. You have to decide as a scientist what your primary question is, and then you go reach for the sample size. That's the world I want to see. Unfortunately, we live in a world where people go backwards. They're like, here's the sample size I can collect. And then they choose their primary aim. I'm not going to say don't do that because I have to be practical, right? I'm not going to put that down. But I really wish that's not the world we were in. And you should know that this is a little known fact. And it's definitely true at NIH. And Nathan is here, so we're going to ask Nathan directly about IS. At NIH, just so you all know, little known fact, on R1, when they publish that budget number, that is suggested. You can write a letter saying you need another $1 million. I need y'all to realize that. Because the world I want to see is, here's my question. I can sell you on my question. It is so dang important, and I need an extra $1 million. That's what I want y'all to be doing. Now, at IES, is there such a model where I can request to go above budget? Talk to me, Nathan. Talk to me.
Well, one, our budget is not at the level of NIH, so that's a start. Two, we do not publicize it, but grantees can request for supplements, but those supplements are limited in scope, in size. And anytime you go over $100,000, it requires external.
There you go.
If you're asking for less than $100, not $100, $100,000. If you're asking for less than $100,000, it can be done internally, but otherwise it initiates a much longer.
Yeah, but I also want to point out something that Danny did not say, okay? So he said that you can request, but he did not say that you will necessarily get it.
That's right.
And that's something to keep in mind because there are lots of issues with NIH reviewing these requests. And I can tell you based on my own experience that in many cases they decline.
Yeah.
So no matter what, it's about maintaining this balance between what you can do practically with the budget that you have, but sometimes it has to do with the population that you're focusing on. Some population, Connie can speak to that. You can't recruit so many participants, you just can't, right? So you have to consider these practical constraints that you have and the scientific novelty that you're trying to achieve. And it's always kind of like you go back and forth, and that's okay. It's totally okay.
We have to be pragmatic, right? Otherwise, we all come to a standstill. And I want you to be pragmatic, but I also don't want you to be an impoverished scientist. And if you really have a primary aim, no, I'm serious. So many of us wake up every morning as scientists. That's not what happens in corporate America, y'all. No, you know? You guys got to think like that. You don't wake up and be impoverished. If you have a question that you think is so important that you need another 100,000 K, make the case for it. Don't just like sit back. You know, unfortunately, we self-select certain qualities in us as scientists, and few people want to go do that, but I insist that you do, okay? And be pragmatic. So okay, if the thing gets declined, you have to be pragmatic. Hey, my request was declined. I'm gonna have to do this at 80% power instead of 95% power. Be legit. Don't try to just get the grant and then live 5 years of poverty. You know what I mean? You're gonna be miserable. So I'm trying to empower you to do high quality science. That's all my job is to empower you.
And Danny, another empowering thing is you're gonna show this when you talk about sample size, but smarts are efficient.
They are.
These are efficient experimental designs. Efficient meaning that they require relatively small samples to detect effects relative to standard randomized controlled trials.
That's right.
To detect effects for questions about constructing adaptive interventions. So even for the question where you're comparing embedded adaptive interventions, you're not comparing individual cells within the SMART, and then he's going to show you this.
Yeah.
You're still collecting outcome data across multiple cells, but you do this in different ways so you can answer multiple scientific questions simultaneously.
That's right. That's right. And that's important because a lot of people come to the table thinking, they look at these trials and they're like, gasp, what's the sample size I'm going to need? And what Billy just said is so important, y'all, because if we lived in a world where we didn't have smart designs, but we still had all the same questions I just put on the table, and you didn't use a smart design, your budget just doubled. You know what I'm saying? So smarts are actually efficient when you put it in context. They're efficient. Yes, sir.
I have a question that you actually really might not like.
Oh, please, please.
That also touches, I think, on sample. I think the issue of generalizability or scalability or replicability is like a major issue, and I think we underappreciate how different samples can be and how even something that appears like the same thing, like even if it's implemented with fidelity and whatever, actually can lead to very different results.
Totally.
So, the question is that the goal of a SMART, or really, any of the intervention research we do, is to try to find something that works, like whatever that thing is. And the goal is that it would work either for a very specific population that it's targeted to, or maybe for everyone everywhere.
Yeah.
And that almost never happens when we do. I mean, first of all, we don't do replication studies much, and when we do, they often fail. So this is one way to try to optimize a thing to get it to work, right? But there's some
to make it as best as it can be. I
Right,
don't
as
even
best
want
as
to
it
use
can
this
be.
language to get it to work, and I don't want any of y'all
well,
to
what
use
does
it.
work mean? I mean,
Yeah.
right. So there's all sorts of questions.
Yeah.
I'm trying to generalize.
Yeah.
But in this sort of design, there's questions that can't be asked, and
What? Like, give us an
for
example.
example, it could be that before random assignment, there are baseline variables, characteristics, either of the individual or the context, like the parent or the home environment, that are actually going to predict response to either DTT or Jasper.
So why didn't we collect them?
Well, I mean, that's a good question, and it actually gets to the real question, which is another approach to this would be like a prediction approach where you collect a lot of data at baseline, and then you use that data to build a prediction model that will tell you who's more likely to respond to DTT or Jasper or whatever.
And you can do that with smarts.
If you
can do that with
collect,
smart data.
Yeah, if you collect sufficient data at baseline.
That's right.
But there are different approaches to answering the same there are different approaches to getting to the same place. So
Yeah.
the question is, have you thought about that? And what advantages do you see in a smart design over maybe a different approach to trying to predict response?
But I want to make something really important here, really clear, is even in your framing of the question, you haven't offered a different approach. So when you talked about machine learning, that's an analysis technique, not a data collection technique. And so we can do that with this here.
But not with 192 people.
Right. So there are limits, right? There are limits. And so what I want to impress upon you is that when you design a trial like this, you're actually trying to get ahead of all of that. You're trying to, suppose you do believe there's some variables here that might be useful for tailoring, and Connie had a few, 2 or 3 that I listed. Pick those that you think are the most important, and now you've listed them. You've told the world, I'm going to go check and test if these are useful. That does not mean there may not be other ones. And so any trial is like what I'm about to say, y'all. Every trial in the world. Because the issue of sample size is also an issue of how much type 1 and type 2 error am I willing to tolerate. So to your question, I would say I haven't yet heard an alternative. When you said machine learning and you think it demands high sample size, it might be you're demanding too low of a type 1 error. And so what I want to say is, we're trying to show you guys a tool that is proactively collecting data to answer questions. You can still use artificial intelligence, machine learning, but don't be an impoverished scientist. If you're going to use those methods that are discovery methods, come right out and say, I'm looking for a p-value not less than 0.05. I'm looking for a p-value less than 0.2. All of a sudden, the 192 is actually going to be enough. Do you see what I'm saying? It's when we get stuck in these little circular things, we bring this baggage with us. Like, when's the last time you guys read a grant that said, I'm going to do a moderator's analysis, but I'm going to tolerate a p-value of 0.15 or smaller? When's the last time you guys saw that? I write grants like that. Because I know, like, I'm not going to be able to find it with 192. I need y'all to think that way.
But then, in terms of advancing science and replicability and generalizability, how does this move us forward? That's like the crux of the question.
Yeah.
Because if you're willing to accept more type 2 error, then the likelihood of not replicating that
is higher.
Much higher, right?
And that's great. That's why it wasn't your top 3 variables. That's why it was you had a list of 20 variables that you thought were going to be moderating these effects. I chose 3, hung my hat on that one. I'm actually going to do a proper moderators analysis, test, pre-specified. But for the other 15, I'm going to go do machine learning methods. I'm going to tolerate it. And you are telling the world, hey, there's less assurances about this. I hope that I'm changing the way you think a little. Billy, did you want to chime in?
Yeah, I think we're mixing up hypothesis testing with hypothesis generating.
we
And I
are.
think it's important to distinguish between the two. Otherwise, it's really difficult to have this conversation.
Yes.
Usually when I use machine learning methods, I'm focusing on generating hypotheses as opposed to testing hypotheses. So I would never propose a p-value. I mean, I think the furthest I would go, to be honest, is to have a confidence interval. But I'm not testing hypotheses. This is purely exploratory, right?
That's right.
But here, this is different. This is actually about hypothesis testing, except that in most cases, the moderator's analysis is not hypothesis testing.
That's right.
It's hypothesis generating, and that's why, again, we do not specify p-values. We don't plan sample size for something like that.
That's right.
So what helps me is to disentangle, right, the two and think about what hypothesis do I test? This usually relates to my primary and secondary scientific questions or aims. And what is it that I want to explore and generate data that could help me come up with new hypotheses in the future and design new studies, move science forward? And this is where moderators analysis, machine learning can come in. Does that make sense?
And the assurances are less so.
Yeah.
But y'all, we say this and we could say till our eyes are blue, but so many people are writing grants where you get to aim 3 and they're still looking for a p-value less than 0.05.
Yeah, but this is
And
our
that's a
job.
problem.
But this is our job as scientists, as
Exactly.
people who participate in this workshop, in this training, and also as reviewers to push back on this.
Exactly.
And I can tell you that I'm always pushing back on this.
Yeah.
And people are willing to listen. And in the same way that you're listening, you're saying, oh yeah, of course. There are hypotheses that I test, and there's exploratory that I do to generate hypotheses. That makes perfect sense. Right?
Yeah, I'm now
You
at a
just need to
setting,
say it.
15 years in, when I write a grant now and I get to moderators, I don't even put a p-value on there. And I say, we're gonna look at confidence intervals. You know what I mean? So I'm trying to be so thoughtful. And then I even have this other section in all the grants I write, additional analysis section. You won't see me even utter a confidence interval. It's just analysis.
Yeah.
So what y'all need to realize is we don't live in a black and white world. Every randomized trial under the face of the sun, every randomized trial can be used to answer many questions with different levels of assurances. Your primary aim is the highest assurance. High power, low p-value. As I start marching down the aims, you can even get to an aim where all you're doing is analysis, no inference, and that is okay. Now, one of you inevitably is going to tell me, Danny, but what about the editors? The only way you're going to get around the editors is you've got to write your protocol paper. Unfortunately, in education science, we don't have people writing protocol papers, but if you write your protocol paper and you lay this out a year before you started collecting the data, when you go to publish that article where you didn't show a p-value, I don't care what journal editor is and how famous they are, you pre-specified this thing. They cannot reject you on that basis. They just can't. Call me. They call me because they can't. I'll go have a beer with the person. They can't do it. Connie, did you want to say something? They can't. They just can't.
I wanted to push back on replicability a little bit, and I agree with you that in science you don't have replicability, but in this case, if you learn something, you would expect to influence clinical practice some. So now when I go back and I do the same study, why would I expect to find the same difference? Because now clinical practice fits. And that's that counterfactual that we always run into.
Yeah.
I think what happens is people want to keep replicating, doing the same study over and over, exact same study. Business as usual, which has changed now to some kind of intervention that's not going to work over time because now it's just kind of blended into clinical practice. So that intervention that you want to test has to be so potent, which makes us work harder at trying to figure out what works best for which kids. And so I think we're always going to have this problem of replicability in the sort of traditional sense.
But I believe, Connie, that it can be managed to some extent. Of course, I can't control how people interpret manuscripts. But if you're proactive about the way we're talking, and when you write your papers, you explain like the different levels of assurances. You don't provide p-values for every result. Even the paper you and I are writing right now, Connie, like that last analysis, I'm gonna double down on I don't want to show a p-value. You know what I mean? There's hypothesis generating things, and it's not black and white. There's a whole spectrum. The only thing you're providing the most assurances about is your primary aim and maybe your secondary aim 1 and maybe your secondary aim 2. That's it. Everything after that is less assurances. But you get to manage that. How do you mismanage that? You wrote a paper. You found this like wildly cool interaction term or moderator. But the way you wrote it made it seem like your analysis was pre-specified. And you didn't even tell people that you went digging for it. Well, you just hurt yourself. And you hurt the rest of the field, because now everybody's running around doing that intervention thinking, oh my God, he got a p-value less than 0.5, massive assurances. No. You know what I mean, y'all? So this is similar to you being impoverished scientists. If you lay this all out, you won't live with that fear of scarcity. You know what I mean? Of that fear that you have to find a p-value. When I train my early career awardees, I am constantly telling them, this is not about you. You're just a scientist. You're asking the questions. This is not about you. And so part of what we're doing in Intervention Science 2.0 is we're trying to disentangle the person from the science. That one's hard, but we're trying.
And if you're worried about time to write a protocol to lay this out, you should know that there are open source platforms out there that will allow you to specify the protocol without having to have a published manuscript.
That's right.
And go through the long process of getting something reviewed and accepted. And we're doing this all the time.
And the other trick I've used, Billy, that's a great trick. The other trick I've used, you're going to love this. For whatever reason, the PI I was working with, it wasn't Connie, wanted to go to a particular journal that had a very limited space. I'm like, wow, how am I going to tell them what are the assurances and the lowest? I just put it all in a supplement.
Mm-hmm.
All right? It's out there. It's published. It was published 5 years ago. When we go analyze the data, you're going to see that there's some analyses I'm going to report in my results that I'm not showing even a conference in. I've already said it. So there's ways around it. There's ways we can all do this. I want you all to do that. Okay, and I'm officially, now I only have 5 minutes, right, Ian? Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to do 5 minutes of Cahoots for what it's worth, but I loved this question because it took us down a path that is real. Like, you aired out this insecurity, you aired out this thing, and it's so real, and I want to go there with you guys, and I want more of this. Everybody hear me? I want more of this questions, okay? Because that's what Billy and I are here to do, is to help you, and unless we know what's in your head and bothering you, we can't help you. All right? Okay, so Ian is going to send me to the Kahoot. We only have 5 minutes, but I think we're going to be able to pull off at least 1 or 2 Kahoots. All right, everybody log into this 989-6841. Oh, God, I loved your question. So this was Matt Hirschberg. Everybody, I want more questions like that, like provocative. Let's get in there. These are the things that they don't teach you when you got your PhD. These conversations, they're not telling you this stuff.
Danny, while people join, can I ask you a clarifying question?
Yes, please.
I think someone in group 1 brought this up earlier, but I wasn't quite clear at the end. If you would not choose AIM type 2 as your primary aim unless you had already done research about AIM type 1. Like, you wouldn't try to just go see what the second stage.
Oh no, I don't agree with that.
Okay.
I don't agree with that.
Yeah.
You get to choose which question is most important, and it's totally fine if there is no evidence or in the literature on AIM type 1, but you've selected AIM type 2. Totally okay. If there was evidence for AIM type 1, why was there a randomization? You know what I mean? So it's totally okay. I'm giving you guys permission to choose the primary aim that is most important to you and that you want to provide assurances about and that you can based on your sample size. Yes?
My take on it was, if they're both theoretically equally effective interventions, you can randomize to either one of those and then look at that adaptive intervention component. That's maybe not what I was supposed to take away, but that's what I took away.
That's a good point. All of the questions I shared up there, AIM types 1, 2, and 3, I just need you to understand all of them are about adaptive interventions, not a single one. And the reason for that is, even AIM type 1, this is really important, everybody listen up, chime in if you're falling asleep. Even AIM type 1 is not about the effect of stage 1 treatment on an outcome before stage 2. Okay? This is key. This is key. If anything, y'all, to Matt's point and to, what's your name? Jenna's point. we are trying to write methods and create them that allow you to bring pragmatics in. By saying aim type 1, it's okay. It's okay for you to do that. You're still adding to the evidence. You see what I'm saying? All right,
Okay.
let's start. I could probably only do 1 or 2, but let's do it. All right, so smarts. Okay. Let's do some Kahoots, and maybe I can go over by 1.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Ian. All right. Does all research on adaptive interventions require a SMART? I taught to the test for this one. So yes, no, if you want your intervention to succeed, only if the intervention is ready for evaluation. Do all research on adaptive interventions require a SMART? All right, rock and roll. Everybody got it right? So let's keep going. Layla and Kay. Oh, Layla's new. Who's Layla? Lala. Lala. So no, the choice of randomized trial depends on the scientific question. Everything leads with the question, not the other way around. For example, if you're ready to evaluate an adaptive intervention that you believe has been optimized or that you think is going to show an effect, don't do a SMART. Just rock and roll. Go do your evaluation trial. All right, like this. All right, let's rock on. Next one. Ooh, a true or false. The tailoring variables embedded in the SMART does not have to be a research assessment. The tailoring variables in a SMART does not have to be, God, I got to work on the wording here, does not have to be a research assessment. True or false? I think I should have just said has to be a research assessment. Yeah, that's right. This is true, you guys. Tailoring variables live in the real world. You guys got it? It's what the teacher's doing. It's not what the researcher's doing. Everybody got that? Anytime you guys hear say the words response, non-response, or slower responder, or responder, that's not the researcher collecting it. Okay. Billy Joel. That's great. So true. In fact, in most cases, the embedding variable response should not be a research assessment. Yes, please. Do not use a research assessment for a tailoring variable, because guess what you just did if you do? Guys, listen closely. If you guys just use the research assessment as a tailoring variable, what did you just do? You just created an intervention that cannot live in the real world. That's what you did. So don't do it. I'm not saying don't do research assessments. No, do research assessments, just don't use them as a tailoring variable. Or, if you use them as a tailoring variable, put all the caveats in your grant and in your paper. Hey, I did a study that has limited applicability to the real world because I used a tailoring variable that is a 90-minute questionnaire and there's no teacher in the world that can do it in 1 minute. You just be clear. And then that's great because you were clear. The next person that comes along will try to solve that problem. You have added to the evidence base. You guys with me? All right, let's rock on. I'm going fast. Which of these two is a higher quality SMART design? Oh, wow. So, in SMART Design 1, the embedded tailoring variable is collected by research staff. And in SMART Design 1, also, the research assessments are collected by research staff. Okay? I just taught to test with this one. And in SMART Design 2, okay, yeah, everybody. All right. All right. By the way, notice what just happened in that question? Like, Smart Design 2 is legit trying to disentangle me, the researcher, from the intervention. Like, legit. Billy, you have a question?
Not really a question, more of a statement, because we need to let everybody go for lunch.
I know.
But what I do suggest, because many of the questions that you have here, they are based on the paper that you wrote with Connie in 2018. So I highly, highly recommend that you go to that paper and look at the Q&A session there and think to yourself, what other questions do we want to bring to that manuscript based on the discussion that we had, and they weren't there, but you think that we should discuss it, and bring it to us, and we can have a session when we can talk about this with you and potentially write another paper with Connie. She's too busy.
All right, everybody clap it out for yourselves.